We're back with season 2. Let's hit it. Hey podcast fam, it's your go-to leadership team coach and host Jessy here, and I'm ready to shake things up. If you're also tired of outdated forms of authority and ready to rebel against the mediocrity of leadership we see today, you might have just found your spot. So join me in unleashing this next generation of leaders by embracing being just a bit too millennial. Let's redefine this thing together. Welcome to season 2 of Too Millennial. In today's episode, we're kicking things off with this little mini episode, a little bit like my size, where I've been reflecting on the last season and the key lessons I've learned about what it means to be a leader today. And here's what I realized. As a millennial, I'm both disrupting everything as well as being disrupted on a daily basis. And this is really the reality of our world right now. And that brings us to this theme of season 2. Disruption. Not just the kind where we're thrown off course, as is kind of going on right now, but the kind where we actually disrupt for positive change. That's what I want to make in the world. And so as I launch the season, I can't help but feeling that weight of everything going on around us and how becoming disruptive alongside this idea of leadership really aligns with the moment, the thing that we need now. So let's dive into the heart of this episode. Today's episode is going to be about a concept that I've been working a lot on over the last several months, which is this idea of disruptive leadership. What is disruptive leadership? Why should we be using disruptive leadership today? How will it support the changes that we're looking to create? So why me and why disruptive leadership? Well, as a child, I just naturally had an inclination to disrupt environments. The problem was I didn't quite understand the leadership part of it. And so my disruption probably wasn't very effective and put me in a lot of really challenging positions growing up. I was constantly battling status quo, constantly speaking my mind, and that wasn't well received. So I started realizing and thinking that this was kind of a bad part of me. There was a badness to being disruptive. And I remember in my 20s telling myself, going into meetings, being like, just shut up. Just don't say it. Just go with the flow. Why can't you go with the flow like everybody else? And it was really painful because I almost was called to speak. But as I've worked and matured and practiced, I've gotten to understand not just the disruption part, which I was naturally good at, but also the leadership component, and brought those two things together in a way that's now almost my job, right? People don't hire me to keep things the way they are. People hire me to disrupt their own status quo, whether it's a client who wants to do or be or feel different. And we do that by expanding their thinking, or a team that, the status quo isn't working for that team. They're not being successful. And so I'm brought in to disrupt that. And so one of the reasons I love this topic is my own narrative, where I went from thinking that I was the problem, that I needed to get rid of this disruptive nature, that it was a part of me that was bad. But now I get to own that superpower. And I get to support all of you in that process. And so I'm really excited to be here to talk about how do we create more disruptive leaders. The one thing I will say, though, for all of you, is that I think sometimes when we talk about these concepts and we talk about how to do them well, we think that, okay, well, if I do it well, then I will be cheered on the sidelines, right? I'll get that pat on the back. Everyone will receive it well. It'll all be great. And I'm here to tell you that is not the case. Disruptive is disruptive. And if we're looking to bring these skills to life because we think it's going to validate something, I'm here to let you know that it doesn't. And that no matter how well you are at this, it's important to understand that being a disruptive leadership comes a little bit of that pain, a little bit of that loneliness, and that ambiguity of not knowing whether or not it was the right thing to do in the right way. And so if you've ever experienced or been a disruptive leader, and that's what you experience, that is not a sign that you did it wrong. That is just the natural fact of what happens when we disrupt an environment. Inherently, we're making others uncomfortable. And so we're going to, especially for people who sense environments, we're going to feel that discomfort as well. So now that I've inspired you all to be disruptive leaders, I'm sure you're like, yeah, after that little talk, I definitely want to get good at this. Let's talk a little bit about what I mean when I say disruptive leadership. So disruptive leaders recognize and replace an unsatisfactory status quo with an alternative that better serves stakeholders. So I'll say that again. What is a disruptive leader? Disruptive leaders recognize and replace an unsatisfactory status quo with an alternative that better serves stakeholders. So why do we practice disruptive leadership? Disruption is everywhere. I mean, we have how many layoffs in the news? We have AI, we have chaos in government, we have consumer fears. All the while, leaders are dealing with a lot of ambiguity because people don't know how to plan in such an unstable environment. And then on top of it, you just have your daily jobs, which inherently, I assume, on a day-to-day basis, you are disrupted by something that you were not expecting to happen that impacts your day-to-day. So we're in highly disruptive environments to begin with. One of the reasons I think we've gotten to this point is because we have not learned disruptive leadership. We've not learned to do this well. And so when things aren't changing in the beginning, what happens is we get more and more extreme measures to get our point across. And so we need to learn, how do we disrupt earlier and in a way that's a lot more refined. So what even does disruptive leadership look like in practice? So the first element that disruptive leaders usually start from is they tend to lead authentically from their core values. And they do this by serving others almost from like this higher calling, and they do it with empathy and humility. Another key aspect about disruptive leadership is that it actually requires no formal authority. So disruptive leaders aren't about titles and status. It's a lot about influencing without having any formal power. In addition to that, disruptive leaders are really great at understanding complex, interconnected, and systematic issues. That's the thing that disruptive leaders are focused on. And they do that by developing an alternative vision along with a strategy that they can execute to realize that vision. So those are the keys to practicing disruptive leadership. Now, let's break it down even further. You now know what disruptive leadership is. You know why it's important. You know why I find this topic really healing. So how do we become better at being disruptive leaders? So the first thing you need to do as a disruptive leader is we actually have to disrupt ourselves. I know it sounds really strange. And we do this by testing our own faulty assumptions because disruption is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. To be an effective disruptor, we have to get comfortable questioning our own limiting beliefs because that's what you're essentially doing. You're testing other people's limiting beliefs. And how can we do that if we aren't able to do that ourselves? And that means really stepping into spaces of discomfort, which is what you do as a disruptive leader. We're pretty much always uncomfortable. The second thing we can do is we can think about disruptive leadership as disrupting our team or those that are most proximate or closest to us, that act closest to us. And this is because every small act, how we listen, how we give feedback, how we handle conflict, this sets a pattern that others pick up and replicate. Too often when we're trying to disrupt environments, we get caught in like the big stuff. We feel helpless in that because we don't have direct influence over. But what we do have direct influence over is our behaviors, our decisions, and what we model every day to those closest to us. And those things make a big impact because we are microsystems. And so our behavior and how we disrupt our team's patterns and behaviors is quite influential and emanates out, ripples out to the rest of us. Right? So change doesn't always come from sweeping reforms. It really starts with those smallest moments that repeat over time until they actually shape an entire system. It's about that iteration because if you think back to the definition of disruptive leadership, it's all about changing the status quo. Whatever the status quo is, we want to break those patterns. So if the status quo is everybody advocating for their perspective and speaking up and talking over each other, the behaviors that will impact the status quo there is listening, asking really good questions, trying to reflect back what you're hearing in the room. So again, it's about breaking status quo. So whatever that status quo is, we're doing things to break that cycle. But we don't want to get caught too much in the distraction, in the noise, because you can imagine if we get so stuck in the day-to-day focusing on all the things that we could disrupt or get involved in, like that is a recipe for burnout. That's really, really ineffective approach to disruption. And so the small behaviors, the small changes matter, but we need to know what we want to change and how to approach that by taking a step back and thinking about it from a larger, big picture view. And so we need to think about how might we disrupt and understand the tensions that are in our system. This is really about pulling the right levers. When I think of levers, I usually think of like org development models, things like strategy, process, structure, people. This is so that we resist the urge to get stuck in the weeds. So let's wrap this up. Let's wrap this whole thing up. What really is the key to what I'm saying? What's the bottom line? For me, the key is stepping into your own disruptive power to really shape the future rather than being shaped by it. And we do that by disrupting ourselves. We do that by making sure that our small behaviors and actions align with the changes we want to make. And we also do that by taking a step back and really understanding the tensions in the system and trying to very strategically impact and influence some of those larger processes. So when we think about those three things, right, disruptive leadership is not about recklessly pushing change or recklessly testing people or recklessly disagreeing with them all the time. It's really this intentional fostering of this culture of experimentation and right continuous kind of iteration, because leading with disruption, this is a lifelong practice. It's not a one-time act. The truth is disruption isn't destruction. It's actually more about transformation. And when we combine it with thoughtful leadership, we don't just break things, which I like to break. But now I get to break things and then I get to rebuild them into something new. It's a beautiful process. We alone cannot fix the system. We alone cannot convince others they are wrong and we are right. We also can't shut down in the face of all of these things that are being thrown at. And so what we need to do is to use our voice appropriately, work across stakeholders, and build coalitions for change. So as you can see, this is a huge topic. It's a lot. I could probably do an entire course just on each of those three parts. And so we weren't going to cover it all today. So if this is something you really want to bring to your organization, reach out, contact me to see what we can do to make sure that we create more disruptive leaders together. Additionally, there is a playbook that's linked in the show notes if you want more ways to put these ideas into practice. So that next step is waiting right there for you.